I'm Caleb Kidd Coy, Epic Legacy Hero Builder, and I'd like to welcome you to Living Like a Bank. Along with myself, you'll hear from other successful experts and people who are busy serving and empowering many lives. You'll see how we're showing others to become debt-free in record time as they build economic discipline while generating a bulletproof family legacy revenue stream together. We'll learn how to live and operate just like the banks do. Hey everybody, Caleb Kidd Coy here, your alchemized slayer of mediocrity, heroic family legacy builder, and host of Living Like a Bank podcast. And today I'm excited to introduce a new aspect of our podcast, the Business Book Club. And we came up with this idea ultimately not only to continue the self-education process, but really to give you more tools and keys that you can put into your tool belt to help you ultimately in your legacy and living like a bank goals. And today I am joined with Mr. Chris McFarland. Chris, how are you doing today?
It's my pleasure to be with you, Mr. Caleb.
Well, happy to have you here today. So Chris and I talked a bit about where to start, right? So many great books out there, so many wonderful health, self-help and educational books, but we came up with the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, who also authored The Art of Seduction, Laws of Human Nature, and many more great books. So tell us, Chris, a little bit about what went on in your mind as you started to read 48 Laws of Power.
Well, Caleb, I actually found it because of the algorithm on Audible. I'm a big Audible guy, and this isn't an Amazon commercial, but I had been reading actually Machiavelli, and for reasons I won't get into. And the algorithm suggested this book like 3 or 4 times, and I was like, geez, maybe I should read that book. And so I started reading it just, as part of my just discursive reading. And as I got into it, right away on the first chapter, it hit me between the eyes with a situation in my own life that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But it's practical is the answer to your question. It's one of the most practical books that I've ever read or been exposed to, because it shows one how to exercise power in life and to not be abused by power. And so I guess we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about that a little bit further. But that's why I got interested in this subject. And I think because it's so general, it lends itself to other books and authors and topics being brought into it, which you and I have discussed that we also want to be able to talk about.
Right. And I appreciate the fact that Robert Greene utilizes real life study examples, real historical accounts of what people have experienced in exercising, right, these laws of power and how it's either benefited them or completely, right, turned against them essentially, and repercussions that, I mean, as much as cost them their very own lives. So we're looking at the extremes, and we're looking at everything in between ultimately, but understanding human nature and human psychology, and really the reason that people do what they do, what motivates us, why we're motivated by it, Chris, because we hear this a lot, don't we? That people are motivated often by need, number one, and by greed too. And this causes us to react or respond in very different ways, depending on what our personal human nature or psyche is looking for. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's exactly right. I'm actually going to go Abraham Maslow here, and his famous hierarchy of needs, because as we all know intuitively, even if we hadn't heard of this Maslow guy, like, you can't be worrying about self-fulfillment or living your best life if you're hungry and you don't have any place to sleep, right? It's kind of common sense stuff. So by using the laws of power in the first place, we can become more aware, like you just said, of the general laws of human nature that apply everywhere. Because, Caleb, as you and I have talked about, we don't really have, well, I mean, we do have them, but kings and queens in today's world, even where they do exist, generally don't really have the power, even in the countries where they rule. The British monarchy, one exception might be the Saudi royal family. I'm sure there's a few exceptions to what I just said, but by and large in the world today, my point is that it's not about kings and queens, but there are still people of power. And those people of power can exist on a very high level. People such as the whoever is the president of the United States, or such things, or the president of the World Bank, or things of that nature. But they could also be just local people, like even in a family, a center of influence, a person who's powerful as a center of influence in a family, or a small business owner. So I think it's really important to emphasize that what we're talking about applies to everyone, everywhere, at all times. Whether or not you're interested in business and economics, these, quote, laws of power apply to everyone. In the preface, it talks about people who try and pretend like they're not playing the game of power, but at least according to the author, and we are here just basically talking about, we're not necessarily saying whether we agree or disagree with Robert Greene's premises, but we are stating what he says as an author, right? And he is saying that people who pretend to not use power are still using power. It's just a deception.
Hmm. Well,
And so
yeah, go ahead.
When I want to talk about deception for a second, because deception is to ensnare or to catch, like in a trap. And there's all kinds of, scams and everything out there in the world. There always have been, especially nowadays on the internet. And so if we're not wary, if we're naive, we're simply going to be the effect of people who have power. So power is out there in the world, and people are going to use it or not use it, and it's going to happen to you. So even if you're not interested in exercising power, and I'm not sure why you wouldn't be, but even if theoretically you weren't, you still would be interested in this book and this topic, because you don't want other people to impose their power on you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I was going to say another great substitute for the word power would be influence, essentially, because I think a lot of folks associate the term power with control. And granted, there's a lot of it there. People that are seeking positions of power are seeking positions of control and influence. But just like anything, right, the dynamic is money being a tool. Is it used for good or bad? Is it used for righteous causes or wicked causes? The same goes for power, right? Are we utilizing it as people of character to exercise positive influence, or are we utilizing it to exercise negative influence and control over others? So those
Exactly,
are some of
Caleb. I
my
think it's
thoughts.
both of those things. It's number one, it's how can we use power for our lives in a positive way? Because if you're talking about power and control, I'm gonna grab my golf club here for a second. Okay, my putter. And if I'm going to play golf effectively, I need to have very good control of my power. And in fact, a lot of putting or any other sport or activity is regulating how much power with control. So how we control power, we can't hope to control power until we first acknowledge it exists and understand its principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in no particular order, Mr. Greene has laid out 48 laws of power. Now, we just talked about power. The other word I really wanted to make sure we touched on was laws, okay? Because laws can also mean a lot of different things, right? So these are not like laws like statutes passed by some government or sanctioning authority, nor are these necessarily laws like the Ten Commandments or something like that, or the Eightfold Noble Path of Buddhism. That's not those kind of laws. They're not presented as immutable laws given to us by some authority, are they, Caleb?
Right.
So I just want to disabuse. Those are two common senses that we think of as laws. They're more like, and as you know, I have a habit of accidentally referring to this book as the rules of power. And I think I know why he did laws, because it just sounds provocative and it's a good title. But it's really more like rules of power that have been observed deductively in the manner of Descartes and Bacon and just generally science, right? So this is a lot like actually Napoleon Hill's book, where How to Think and Grow Rich, where he went and interviewed tons of people and then distilled their knowledge into Think and Grow Rich.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to be referencing that book as well as other business books abundantly as we go through this series. But in this book right here about the laws of power, we're looking one quote law at a time. And in each case, the book does present a format, doesn't it, Caleb, where we're presented with an example of someone not observing the rule or law and how it negatively affected them because of it. And then we're given an instance of someone who did apply or instantiate the law in their own lives and how it benefited them, and then a brief summary. So that's kind of the format that we'll walk through with each episode. And actually, Caleb, do you want to talk about the kind of the format of how we're going to proceed?
Well, I just wanted to mention, as a student of international law, I look at things like natural law, which essentially are the foundational principles of international law. So there are things that, some people call them God's law, whatever you want to call them. Ultimately, it's natural law. It's the laws of nature that, have been watched, have been studied by humanity by thousands of years and remain steadfast. Thereby they're, referred to as a law versus a rule or something like that. But yeah, our idea for this was essentially just to get a group of us together, who have read these respective sections of the book, if you will, and just kind of have an open-ended discussion, thought provoking. What is it, what does it mean to us? Maybe our own real life examples where we've seen it or things like that. But ultimately just to, again, as Chris stated, bring more awareness and more attention to the fact that these laws, principles, whatever you want to call them, these rules are at play. They're at work in our everyday lives in a way they may not be as extreme as some of the stories that we'll read. They are at work, and being aware of them, I think, is what Robert Greene was really trying to accomplish, that we can understand what they are and how they function, and how are we, again, utilizing them for the benefit of our own lives and others in our everyday endeavors.
And I think we can't really wrap up today with this introduction without talking about what does this have to do with living like a bank?
Mm-hmm.
And so the other thing I wanted to talk about with power, we already talked about how power can be extremely negative. And in my view, an example of that would be megalomania, or the undue fascination of exerting one's power and influence on others. Okay. And I think that's how we often think of power. And that's certainly not what we're here to teach people how to do. In fact, if anything, we're here to look at means by which we could protect ourselves from such things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But when we do talk about power, according to Robert Greene, now hear me out now, is amoral. And now I did not say immoral. I said amoral. Because morality is, I'm not saying morality is bad, but morality is given to us by something else. Whereas power in a social sense, which is what we're talking about, is one's ability to establish one's own agency. In other words, to be sovereign. And that's what we're all about with leaving a legacy, isn't it, Caleb?
No, it absolutely is. And it opens up a whole other can of worms, which we don't have time to discuss today. But, exercising the right of self-determination and being a people who are not only independent in thought, but we are proactively building the world, the society, our surroundings to become a better place. Are we active participants in building something that, we're going to leave it behind? That's our legacy. We live every day, our actions, our words, right? We're leaving that imprint, but is it something that's positive? Are we building towards something better, or are we simply occupying space, right? Are we simply
Yep.
going through the motion? Napoleon Hill referred to it as drifting. Are we just drifting through life, right? Being your average, everyday, ordinary person with no uh, precise plan or no vision in our hearts. And
Right.
we're all aware that without a vision, people perish. You have to have a vision of where you want to go, what you want your future to look like. And again, none of us have total control over that, right? Life is always throwing curveballs, but to the best of our ability and what we can control, are we building and shaping the kind of legacy that we want to leave to our kids, to our grandkids, to the generations who follow behind us.
And we can't do that without power. And how we use that power is a whole nother subject. But what we're here to talk about is like the pieces of a puzzle.
Yep.
Here's 48 laws of power. And we're going to examine each one of them discreetly and individually with each podcast. And at the end of this, we're not going to have any grand solutions. It's up to each individual person to apply these rules and these laws. But if you don't know what the laws are, how could you hope to control them or use them in a beneficial way? So I want to send us out with two quotes. You just mentioned Napoleon Hill. One of my all-time favorite quotes, probably one of my personal top 3 favorite quotes I've ever heard, is Napoleon Hill said, "Anything we vividly imagine," what you just talked about, "ardently desire, and enthusiastically act upon must inevitably come to pass." Now, Caleb, you know that Nietzsche is one of my other favorite intellectual heroes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not that I want to die of syphilis and loneliness in the mountains like he did, but I do dig Nietzsche. And Nietzsche said that there were only 3 truly great people who had transcended being men or humans and verged on being superhumans. And they were Julius Caesar, Napoleon, and Goethe, the German poet. I want to send us out on a quote from Goethe, which is actually quoted by Greene. And Caleb, as you know, each chapter ends with a couple of quotes. And this is the quote I want to end us on today. "The only means by which one's ends may be achieved are force and cunning." Love also, they say. But that is to wait for sunshine, and life needs every moment. End quote, Goethe.
Interesting. I like that. Well, guys, we hope that this new business book club feature will be beneficial again to you and just kind of help open your mind and your thinking process to new things and to new ideas. And again, don't forget to like and subscribe and follow the Living Like a Bank podcast on YouTube and across the board on all podcast platforms. And we appreciate you taking some time to watch with us today, and we'll see you next time. Ciao. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please be sure you subscribe on YouTube or the podcast on anchor.fm and follow me on social media at Metalpreneur. If you're ready to talk about building your own bank, use the QR code or go to rebrand.ly/buildabank. Be sure and join us for the next broadcast as together we learn to live and operate just like the banks do.